Hello, everyone, and welcome to Travel Flow Radio. I'm your host, Sindigo, and here we share wild and inspiring travel stories that give you the motivation and insights to go see what this big world has to offer for yourself. So, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. This world is interconnected in many ways. This planet is physically interwoven through cycles of nutrients, water, and through life and death. Socially, we are connected to our family, our friends, and everyone we interact with. People weave together within their environments mostly unconsciously, creating a relationship with the land and the space they occupy. Seemingly unaware of how much the modern world has created distance for people from each other and their original home, the whole planet that's beneath our feet. Most of us living in apartments or neighborhoods with no real connection on the people that we live beside. These relationships with ourselves, our communities, and our spaces are very important. Impacts and adjustments and threats can cause these connections to weaken, but in some cases, it can only make them stronger. People yearn for stronger bonds with their community and environment. Stronger bonds means more compassion for ourselves and others, knowing that we're not alone in this world, even when our differences may make us think that. Remembering that we are all connected to each other and everything, including the earth itself, can be a huge shift of perspective on your daily life. Inviting you to have gratitude for where you are and where you came from, this episode of Travel Flow Radio is going to discuss my time I spent down with an indigenous community in Chile. My eyes were opened up to how strong a bond can be between people, community, and the land that they occupy. So thanks for tuning in, and I'm excited to get this started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Travel Flow Radio. I'm your host, Sindigo, and thank you for tuning in. This is going to be my first episode that is actually on the podcast, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. This is a story about a time when I was living down with an indigenous community and down in Chile, and really excited just to share this story. This is a really kind of intense story, just for forewarning, it does have a little bit of violence involved, but I do think it's a really beautiful story, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So we're just going to jump right on in. One of my favorite things that I realized about living and connecting with indigenous communities is that I really got to see how connected they are to their land. Like, it is just insane how connected they are to their land, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on this as we get more into the story, but it just really goes to show how terribly sad and awful it is that most indigenous people were stripped of their native lands and stripped from their cultures and the places that they knew best. And not only that, but also that native land or lands were stripped away from their original caretakers and from the people that knew the land the best. So I just want to put that out there. Like, please remember, whenever you're recreating, especially in a beautiful place, that the people that were originally there probably aren't. And just to give thanks to those people and those ancestors, and give your condolences that they were stripped of their land and their tradition. And but yeah, that's just something that, like, I really, really see in indigenous communities, just seeing how connected they are to their land. So just keep that in mind whenever you're outside, and it will, I'm sure, make your experiences better if you pay a little respect, even make an offering to the land that you are occupying. Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get into it. I was down in Chile, in South America, in the southern region. So really close to probably the biggest city that most people know would be Villarrica, and a little bit closer, a smaller town nearby would be Panguipulli. So Panguipulli, really fun to say. But it actually means soul of the puma in Mapunsungun. So Panguipulli, soul of the puma in Mapunsungun, which is the native language of the Mapuche people, which is the main indigenous group that's in southern Chile, or all over Chile and parts of Argentina. And it's really beautiful language. To me, it seems like it has kind of like a more of like Asian dialect sounds to it, more than kind of more of like a Latin language. So it was really interesting to learn a little bit about it and hear it um, almost constantly. But um, yeah, it was. I'm not going to disclose the actual location of the community, but it was a beautiful piece of land that was right on a lake. And there was about 8 cabins right on the lake, and they had been abandoned for about 20 years. So they weren't that, they were in really nice shape, honestly. Like, they still had furniture and like some beds and some chairs, no water, no electricity, and pretty disgusting on the inside, honestly. There's a bunch of rat poop in there, and I had to get out a dead rat out of the house and clean it up. But we cleaned it up and we made it really nice, and it was a great place to live. It, like I said, it was on a beautiful lake, had a little island in the middle of the lake that you could swim to, and in the distance there was volcanoes, just beautiful off in the distance there. And it was also hydrangeas everywhere, beautiful flowers, apple trees, plum trees. And like I said, there was 8 cabins, and there was also this structure that we called a ruca, and it had at least like 3.5 walls and a counter, and we had electricity running to that because we had a fridge and we had a place to charge our phones, and then we had some couches in there, and then we had a fire pit in the middle where we would do all of our cooking. So got really good at cooking on the fire. I absolutely love it, honestly, even though it's pretty stressful. But yeah, honestly, we had a garden. We had built a compost while we were there. We also had built some dry toilets while we were there. So it was a nice little community. Um, at times, there was sometimes, 15 people in the community, at times only 5, sometimes more, sometimes less, just kind of depending. And I lived there for about a month or so while I was down in Chile. So it was a really cool experience. To be honest with you, I was actually sitting on the back burner of the community in a sense because I was just really quiet and observant and didn't talk that much. And if you know me, that is not like me at all. So there's always something coming out of my mouth, unfortunately, and that's also maybe why I had to start a podcast, because I just love talking so much. But anyways, but in this case, but at this point, my Spanish is very good, but they were also speaking Mapunsungun there, and I don't really know much of that language. I was learning a little bit while I was there, but they were speaking Mapunsungun, and then primarily they were speaking Spanish, but a Chilean Spanish. And if you know Chilean Spanish, it is its own language on its own. Like, I hate to say it, but it is some shit Spanish, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it is so fun to listen to. I think it is hilarious at times. And I absolutely love speaking some Chilean Spanish. But if you know what I'm saying, a Chilean speaking to another Chilean in, their Chilenismo, their what is it called? Slang, in their Chilean slang. It is very hard to understand. So, like I said, I was taking the back seat. I was being observant. I was learning. I was taking it all in. And I was so grateful to be there because I was the only white person in the community, which at sometimes people were like, okay, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And to be honest, I was traveling with my partner at the time. He had gotten connected to the community through his friends, and we went to like live there and to learn and to help build up their community a little bit too. And it was just a great experience. I'm so interested in other cultures and getting to know and spend time with indigenous groups. So I was like, I'm all about this right now. Even though I was very quiet in the actual time. And that actually reminds me of something really important that I try to embody now whenever I'm traveling. But it's actually something that somebody told me on one of my travels this year, earlier this year. But they told me whenever I'm experiencing something to always soak up every last bit and squeeze out every last bit of the experience that you can. So that's something that, like, looking back on my time then, that I wish I would have done is, you know, take up more space there and, be more talkative and ask more questions when I was kind of just like taking the back seat, like I was saying, in that community. So just a reminder to always be squeezing out every last drop of an experience that you can before it's over, because more likely than not, you're going to be looking back on that experience and wishing that you were back there. Um, but yeah, so this community was there and trying to bring back the Mapuche culture, because unfortunately, just as many other indigenous groups have gotten their land stripped from them and their traditions kind of ripped out from under them, so had the Mapuche people in Chile. So the sense of this community that I was in was just trying to kind of reestablish the Mapuche culture in that area, and kind of like put their foot down and say, like, we're taking back the land that was once ours. We're going to take it on back, and that's what we're doing here. So they were occupying this land. They were teaching and learning the Mapunsungun language and trying to revive that, because that is such a huge part of culture. If you lose your language, um that shit doesn't come back. So anyways, the land that we were actually on, they had kind of taken it over from, like I said, it had been abandoned for almost 20 years. And the man who actually owned it, he was really, really old. And from what they told me, he knew what was going on, but he didn't really know what was going on because he was so old and senile. He didn't really understand what was really happening. But of course, the rules are in Chile, the law is, if you occupy a piece of land for 5 years and nobody tells you to get off of it, or nobody comes up and says, claiming that it's theirs, then it is yours. So they were in, I think, their second year of this, trying to get to 5 years. But from my understanding, the guy knew about it. He was okay with it, but he kind of like probably didn't really know what was going on. But anyways, the the people are just trying to show that they still are like in control of this land, and that's what they would do during ceremonies. So I got to be a part of one of the ceremonies that they had while I was there. And so it actually happened on a different property. One of the women who was one of like the main organizers of the community, she had another property that was a lot bigger and had a lot bigger open space to have these type of ceremonies. So a lot of people came in, and to put some like respect on the space, they actually ended up blocking off the road on either side. So this is a pretty busy road that you took to get into Panguipulli. And in the road, they would create this line of fire that would stop all traffic from passing by the property the whole day, because there was two reasons they did that. One was because they wanted to create peace and tranquility and keep like this, calmness about while the ceremony was going on, so it didn't disrupt any of the any of the processes of the ceremonies, talking to the ancestors or the spirits or whatever it may be. They didn't want anybody disrupting them, right? And then the other reason is that, again, they wanted to show that they were in control of this land, and nobody was going to get by that day if they didn't tell them that they could get by. So I think they maybe let one person through that whole day. From like, we got there at 4 a.m. and started the fire in the road, and we didn't stop till about probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon. So it was pretty much an all day thing. And I remember that morning, it was so crazy because we woke up at like 4 a.m. It's still pitch black dark outside. I'm super tired and I'm really cold. And we go and we actually, which I'm not the proudest to say this, but it's part of the story, so I'm going to tell you. But I'm not the proudest to say this, but I will say that in my defense, like I said, I'm taking the back seat, I'm observing. And for me, from the United States, white girl, being able to experience this, I'm just sitting in the back seat because I have never experienced something that indigenous people have experienced like that. Almost nobody in my lineage has either. So I have no right to judge or comment or say or try to stop somebody from reacting and taking actions in the way that they do to fight for what they believe in and what they think is of right, and trying to get the justice for what they deserve. I'm not in a place to say where it draws the line on you shouldn't do this because you feel this way. Like, I have, being a white person from the United States, I have no room to tell an indigenous person that they shouldn't be doing something when I have not ever experienced what they have experienced of getting their culture and their land, pretty practically everything stripped from them. I have no concept of how that feels. So how can I judge or try to stop somebody for doing whatever they feel is necessary to get their point across, you know? Anyways, that's yeah. So anyways, we wake up at 4 a.m. We go to the neighbor's house, and that from the property that we're having the ceremony. So not where the cabins is. This other property we're having the ceremony. We have some neighbors, and apparently they're not great people. That's what I asked. They said they're not great people. We ended up stealing some tires from them, and we're like rolling these tires down the street. Like, I got one tire in my arm holding it, and then I'm rolling the other tire down the street, and we get back up to the house, and then we start this line of fire with some wood, and I think we had some like fuel or something that we put on there because it just seemed like it immediately went up in smoke or in flames. And then unfortunately we did put tires on the fire, which I knew was wrong in the moment, but like I said, I'm not going to be the person that steps in and be like, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. um like I said, I'm going to let people get their emotions and their feelings out. And there was no way I could have stepped in and said anything. But anyway, so he burned some tires. And if you've ever seen or smelt tires burn, it is not a good time. Like, it is super stinky. And then the little metal like strips that are in tires, like the little metal hairs, they just like curl up and go crazy. Um But I remember this image is burned into my head where one of the main organizers of the community, he was this like really big, tall, like Chilean man. And he was walking like right at me and down the street, down the middle of the street. And it's just, since it's so early, the sun, it hasn't even started to come out yet. So it's like pitch black dark, but you can see his silhouette, and behind him is this line of fire, and you can just see him just walking down the street. And I wish in that moment I could have taken a picture of him, because it was just such a crazy moment that was just burned into my brain. Um so the daylight comes, and every now and then somebody comes and tries to get by, and we're like, no. And they're like, why are you doing this? And we're like, because we can. So I actually never got to go into the ceremony because I just didn't really feel like it was my place to. Most of the young people were standing outside and making sure that nobody was trying to like get in or going past the lines of fire on the road. But so I actually never got to experience what was happening in the ceremony, but I just felt like for me, I just didn't feel, I guess, worthy of going in there and experiencing it. Um, but I mean, it was just a beautiful chance to be a part of. Um, so that was a great experience. And then, so we were, getting ready to leave the community. And so we're packing our bags, we're getting ready, like we're here to travel, right? Like we're here to see more of the country and keep traveling farther south. So we pack up and we leave. We tell our goodbyes, we leave, and we're about 3 days out on the journey. And we are camping at a place called Rio Bueno, and a really fun place to camp for sure. We had a wild night of drinking melon con vino. And so melon with wine, it was like it's a honeydew melon with white wine inside. And it got out of hand. And that's a whole other story in its own. But anyways, just so you get the picture, I wake up very, very, very hungover. Like we had had 4 liters of wine, an extra bottle of wine, and then a couple beers. Like it was insane. So I wake up extremely hungover the next day. Wake up, crawl out of my tent, throw up. It's like that type of morning. I'm not very proud of it, but like I said, I'm gonna tell you guys the whole story. And then I crawl into my hammock and I'm trying to go back to sleep. And my partner, he's like nowhere to be found. Which I mean, I'm not worried about it, but like he just wasn't there. He'd already left the tent. And so I'm, just kind of chilling out in the hammock, and my partner comes back to me, and he is just in tears, and he's just crying. And I'm like, oh no, like what has happened? Like, and he's like, something happened at the community. Something happened at the community. And I'm like, what happened? And he said, Labao was shot. Labao is dead. And it just like hit me so hard. One of the girls in the community got shot and killed. So of course, like we're like, we have to go back. We have to go back and be there for everybody. Like they were always there for us and always there, welcomed us into their community with no questions asked. And to go back and support them like right now. Like there's no way we can't. So we pack up best we can and try to get some food, and then we drive back. Thankfully, we were only about 3 hours away, so it wasn't too bad. But when we get there, there's another line of fire guarding the community's gates, and a bunch of people with like sticks and shit like hanging out. And so they let us in. We park, and so at this point, I had been in Chile for about a month already, and it had not rained a single drop the whole time I'm there. It had not rained a single drop. So, and during the funeral lasted 3 days. The funeral lasted 3 days, and every day it rained, like almost all day. Like there was at least a constant drizzle. And it just showed me, like I was talking about earlier, how this group of people they are so connected to their land, and that the land is crying with them. And that just blew me away. I was like, holy shit, like these people are connected to their land. And that's where it snapped for me that, wow, like this is why we don't strip people from their land. This is why we don't take people from where they're from and never let them go back. Um, because the people and the land, they can cry and they can grieve together. But that was just so incredible to me. But anyways, um yeah, so she got shot and killed. It was a terrible situation. Um our neighbors, so this is a different neighbor than the ones that we stole the tires from. Our neighbors and us were not on good terms. Our neighbors were these like fancy like condos that had been built, and from my understanding, they just came in and built them and didn't get like anything like checked over or anything about the land. They just came on in and like started building them. And they were just really rude anytime we ever had like anything going on at our community. They would always drive around on their sea-doos and like make a lot of noise when the lake that we were on, you actually weren't able to have any motorized vehicle or like motorized boats or anything in there. So um, there was just a constant conflict between the two of us. And so one night, Labao, which is her name was Bao, but in Spanish you all sometimes you add like la or el in front of a name when you're talking about somebody, and I've just always kind of referred to her as Labao, and I just kind of like how it sounds, but um she was a amazing person. But she anyways she was walking up to a group of people that were trying to camp on the land, and her and another really dear friend named Nacho were going, and they were going up to tell these people that, hey, yeah, you can camp here, just please like be respectful of the land. There's compost toilets in the back, or there's dry toilets in the back. There's water over here. Please just be respectful. So they were walking up to tell these people that they could camp there. While they're doing that, the neighbors, they have a landscaper out, landscaper in quotation marks, because the landscaper was actually the hitman and shot Laval right there, and she immediately went down. And it was tough because there was so little people on the at the community at the time, and there was only like 5 people there that night, and so they couldn't really retaliate like immediately, and it's just terrible. It's just so sad. So that's how that happened. So during so like I said, the funeral lasted for 3 days, and hundreds of people came pouring through the communities. Because Labao, she was also trans, and so she had transitioned from being a man to being a woman, and she was such a beautiful person, and was just so nice and always so patient with me speaking. Like I always was like, wow, this is such a nice person to talk to. Like they're like slowing down their Spanish to me, they're teaching me Mapunzungun. And I just always had such a high respect for her, because also she would run and be right up with the rest of the men of the community anytime there was like a question about anything, or somebody was at the gates or anything that was going on. Like she was like right there with like a weapon in her hand ready to go. um and she was really good with the native language, and she was always teaching people and always cooking and just like pushing for the success of this community, and just like laying her heart out on the line, obviously, for this community. So, of course, hundreds of people are pouring in from the Mapuche communities around. They were coming. The trans community of Chile, and where she was originally from, and all her friends were pouring in. And of course, her family, it was there, and just hundreds of people came through to pay their respects. So it was a beautiful casket. It had an araucaria tree on the casket. carved into it, into the wood, and it was just so gorgeous. I've never seen a casket so pretty. And so the casket was in the center of the property, and there was 5 fires around the casket that was supposed to protect her body and her soul, and the casket was never supposed to be left alone. So for 3 days, and then I'm pretty sure the funeral went on for a little bit longer than 3 days, but I was just there for 3 days. And so we were never supposed to leave the casket alone. So a lot of people slept outside by the fires to keep the casket company. And so we would sleep by the fire outside on the ground, and we gave our like spaces in the cabins to a lot of the elderly people that came and a lot of the children that came. And so that was tough at times because like I said, it was almost constantly raining, and when it would rain hard enough, we'd have to go and sleep in our cars. But it was well worth it. I wouldn't have had it any other way, honestly. And throughout the funeral, of course, it's very different from the funerals that we have here in the United States. Like it's 2 hours and everybody's quiet and nobody really like expresses. I mean, people express things, but people grieve differently. I'm not trying to hate on modern funerals in the United States, but it just blew me away how different the experience was because people were coming in and like chanting and singing and dancing and just screaming right beside the casket. And I remember her best friend was just over the casket and she was just like, yeah, 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 yeah. And just letting it out, which was like their go to chant. They would always be like, yeah, 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 yeah. Just about like anything, whether it's at a ceremony or, something happy, something sad, that would just be their go to chant. So, um, of course, her mother was there. And that was really hard to see, like a mother bury her child. And but it was just beautiful to see the celebration of life and death through the song and the dance and all the food that we shared. Like my job for like the longest was peeling tomatoes. Like I thought I had entered this eternity of peeling tomatoes that I was never gonna get out of. Peeling and dicing tomatoes and onions was my life for a little bit there. So that was one of my jobs. Another one of my like prime, I don't even know if it would be roles, but like something that I preferred to do because I wasn't really like that excited to be in the kitchen, honestly. And I was trying to like spread my time out, a little bit. But anyways, I was also up at the front at the line of fire because a lot of the younger people were outside the gate and protecting it and are standing right beside the line of fire. And so I wrapped my head up in a black t-shirt because I have like kind of like brownish hair but little blonde when I get in the sun a lot, and I just didn't want anybody to see any of my blonde hair and like signal me out or anything. So I wrapped my head up in a black t-shirt and all you could see were my eyes. And then I had this huge metal stick that I stood beside the line of fire with and just stood there because the numbers of people really helps as well when you're trying to guard the community. And while I'm standing there, I'm seeing all of these army trucks roll into the neighbor's property, and the neighbor had brought the army in, the Chilean like military, to protect their property and protect them. And so I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And of course, again, during the funeral, our neighbors also rode their little like water ski, like a sea-doo. I said sea-doo earlier. Water ski. I'm not even sure what to call it, but those little like bug things. It's like a motorcycle, but for the water. And was just flying that around while we're having our funeral. And like I think we all started throwing rocks at him and try to hit him and we're yelling at him to like leave us alone and like keep the peace, while we're trying to grieve over a loss. Um and it was just very like eye opening and just like life changing. And I think about that community very often, like if not like a couple times a week. And I can't wait to go back down there and see them at some point and offer them some more support and love and see where they're at. I'm hoping them the best. Rest in peace for Laval. She eventually was able to get buried in a Mapuche traditional cemetery because although she was not originally, Mapuche heritage, which is kind of like doesn't let they're typically really strict with who gets to be buried in these cemeteries. So fortunately, because she was so involved in fighting, for this community and for the Mapuche culture, they actually decided to put her in Mapuche cemetery. So that was really, one of her wishes that she would have wanted. And rest in peace, Laval. I like to think that she listened to this as well and heard me, and just know that that she was so inspirational for me, and I just am in awe and of her and her memory, and that she will never be forgotten, and she is always loved. So yeah, that was the story, y'all. I know that was a little heavy, and I appreciate you listening. And I promise they won't all be this sad, but I really hope you enjoyed that one. That's one that is a staple to my memories down in Chile. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. I sure did. And this first one was one of my personal stories, just so everybody can get to know me a little bit. And so that will be the premise of some of the episodes. And a lot of the episodes will also have guest speakers on, and it will be more interview style of their experiences and their travel stories. So I'm excited. Next week, we have an interview with one of my dear friends that I met while I was traveling down in South America. Her name's Maddie, and it's about her story when she spent some time down in India. So I'm excited for that one. Definitely catch us next week so you don't miss out. And thank you guys so much. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you next time.